Hi everyone, it is Matt Difanis with RE/MAX Realty Associates, and I am coming to you from a Signature Homes new construction spec house in Champaign, Illinois. And I want to talk to you today about what makes new construction so much more expensive than construction that in some cases is only a few years old, as little as 5 or 6 years old. So I'm going to give you a quick tour of highlights of items that have to go into new construction today that do contribute to making it more expensive, but that also contribute to incredible energy efficiency as well as real-world comfort. So stay tuned. You see that these walls are all pink and they got a stud wall perimeter all the way around, and that's because the most recent round of building codes has a whole bunch of energy efficiency mandates, one of those being insulation requirements even on the foundation, even on an unfinished basement. Let's have a look at HVAC because that's another big one. So the heating and air conditioning system looks much like they have for a lot of years, and on heating and air conditioning you have supply ducts and you have return ducts. And so on this one, the fan is in the furnace housing, it blows air up, and these are the supply ducts right directly above. This is the return duct. Well, for decades, heating and air conditioning installations would route the return air in cavities in the wall, so even in the stud wall space, or you would see commonly boxing in with ductboard a joist space and using that for a return. The problem with that is, and why that's not allowed anymore, is you've got all of these little holes in those spaces, which meant that even if you enclosed it with ductboard, it wasn't airtight, and therefore it was pulling some air in from other places, including possibly your attic. And so one of the other cost increases for new construction is every inch of the return system has to be fully ducted in sheet metal, and not just ducted, but check this out. Ducted and taped and made, essentially airtight to the greatest extent possible. So Signature is one of the builders that has migrated to using PEX water supply lines. PEX, P-E-X, is a plastic composite material, and the good thing about PEX is that it is flexible and also can expand a little bit so that in the event of a hard freeze, it would not typically burst a PEX pipe. But the other advantages are that PEX water lines are flexible, and in this case, what we're looking at is a central manifold. And so that means that every plumbing fixture in this house has its own little stub on this manifold, and these supply lines are a direct and continuous run all the way to each plumbing fixture. So compared to old school sweating of copper plumbing lines, you don't have joints all the way throughout the house that are potential failure or leak points. And so you have one fitting here, and then each of those lines goes all the way to its end plumbing fixture or water use source. There are a lot of builders that don't do this. They'll use PEX, but they don't do a central manifold, and so you'll have a branch coming off from the water main and then a whole bunch of fittings and joints throughout the rest of the system. That defeats one of the big purposes of using it. So it's a little more expensive to do it this way, but it's a neater, cleaner, and lower risk of failure solution. Next up on the items that make new construction costs higher, but also safer, would be the electrical panel. So it's been standard for decades now that new construction, residential new construction, would have a 200 amp panel. As a former home inspector who was in our market for decades once said, 200 amps is adequate to run a manufacturing facility. In other words, no house is ever going to pull anywhere close to 200 amps. In fact, no house is ever going to pull more than, say, 40 or 50 amps at one moment. However, the reason you need these 200 amp panels is because modern code requires that so many different items have dedicated circuits, which means that it's not one circuit running 3 or 4 or 5 different things. So a quick look at the panel labeling confirms. Obviously, you have the traditional 220 circuits that have to have their own AC, the dryer, and an electric range and water heater. but you'll see that you've also got the dishwasher that has to be dedicated, the microwave that has to be dedicated, the washing machine outlet that has to be dedicated, and on and on and on. So while ground fault circuit interrupters, GFCIs, have been required for wet locations, for outlets that were going in unfinished basements and garages and along kitchen or bathroom counters, those have been required for years, and those are the outlets that have the test and reset buttons typically on the outlet. But more recently, you have electrical code requirements that dictate that you have arc fault interrupter outlets. That's yet another safety mechanism that is designed to shut off current immediately before an electrical fire could be caused by arcing. But that means that you look at the number of circuit breakers in this panel that now have test and resets, and all of those cost more money. They're all safer. They're all designed to minimize the risk of failure and fire, but they all add to the price of new construction. Next up, radon mitigation system. So we're looking at, I'm going to back up a little bit so you can see better. We're looking at the sump pump for groundwater, the wastewater ejector pump for a future bathroom if you finish the basement. But then over here is the radon mitigation system. Now, right now, this is just a passive system. This has just had the pipe that's been put in, and if it tested high for radon, then an active ventilation fan gets installed. But current building code requires that this be built into the house, sunk below the slab if it's on a basement, and run all the way up through the house, through the attic, and terminated outside. So radon mitigation. So next on the list of items that contributes to the higher cost of new construction are windows and insulation requirements. So since about 2014, most of our local jurisdictions have had building codes that mandated windows with low E glass. So everything now has to have low E glass. And of course, that's great because it's another energy saving feature. But the other thing is, you look at the window sills, you notice the window sills are super thick. They're very deep, and that's because the increased wall insulation requirements, which builders can hit a couple of different ways. They can either use a higher density, higher R value insulation in a 2x4 wall, but most builders in our central Illinois market choose to hit their R19 insulation requirement in exterior walls by moving to 2x6 exterior walls. So again, when this most recent round of building codes took effect, many of our local builders switched from 2x4 framing for exterior walls to 2x6 framing for those exterior walls. That has a few different advantages, but it increased costs. Obviously, there's a lot more lumber used. It results in more structural rigidity, and then those thicker walls using traditional fiberglass bats, thicker fiberglass bats, are able to hit that R19 insulation requirement for exterior walls. So related to the wall insulation requirement is increased attic insulation requirements, and that is now up to R49, and again, another real-world energy-saving feature. So I hope you found this little tour helpful. This is not in any way meant to be an exhaustive list, but rather to hit some of the highlights of the things that contribute to the higher cost of new construction. But it's not just higher cost, because you do get higher energy efficiency. And that cost is driven up obviously by paying current year's labor and materials costs, but also every time an energy code or building code increases its requirements overnight, you're going to have some expenses that increase along with that. But that increased cost of new construction doesn't just get you that enhanced energy efficiency. And that does translate into real world savings on your natural gas and electricity bills. But in addition to that, new construction, of course, means that you're getting an entire house that is covered by a warranty from the builder, but almost all of the different components of that house all start out with 0 miles on the odometer and with warranties of their own. Every shingle, every window, every appliance, and a lot of other products, and on and on and on. So new construction offers you low energy costs and a relatively long period of time before you start dealing with the headaches of any major capital improvements. So if you have any questions, of course, please feel free to leave me a comment or reach out to me directly. Hope you found this helpful.